I'm going to hand it over to Kent Wheeler. He's at the Center for International Trade and Forest Products at the University of Washington. And Kent?
I really appreciate this invitation from the Carbon Leadership Forum to speak. With 190 participants, this is about 190 times the number of people I've met with recently. So we are certainly in unusual times. This week, a roll of toilet paper is costing more than a barrel of oil. And I certainly hope we get a solution to this and get back to normal soon. As Kate mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the University of Washington in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, and I'm the director of a research center there called the Center for International Trade and Forest Products, also known as CINTRAFOR. There's a little bit about my background, but basically I've been in the forest industry for the past 33 years. The first 30 of those were spent working around the world on market development and plantation management, most of that with the Weyerhaeuser Company. About 3 years ago, I finally landed my dream job teaching and doing research at CINTRAFOR at the university, which I really enjoy. CINTRAFOR is a research center that focuses on research and education related to, as our name says, international trade and forest products. And while forestry is, of course, the main topic of our work, trade is also an important part because we believe that peace is a natural effect of trade, and that when people and countries trade with each other, they're less likely to fight. So we stress that, I want to stress that everything I say about wood use is predicated on the assumption that it is sustainably sourced wood. We believe that using sustainably sourced wood is good for both the environment and for humanity, but likewise, unsustainably sourced wood is not good. And we do a lot of work trying to help stop the flow of illegal trade and destructive harvesting. Forest certification will be discussed in a later seminar, so I won't spend much time on it here, but I do want to emphasize that we have an incredible amount of knowledge about effective and environmentally sound forest management. And these principles are embodied in forest certification programs that you can rely on to know that the wood you use comes from sustainably and responsibly managed forests. The two most prevalent forest certification schemes are PEFC and FSC. PEFC is an umbrella organization for more than 50 other national certification schemes, including SFI in the US. In my opinion, both are good and far better than non-certification. I believe we're better served by increasing the areas certified than by debating about which of the certification schemes is superior. I want to note that, and this is important, that there is a cost to sustainable management. Poorly managed, unsustainable forestry where trees are cut with minimal cost and products flood the markets is always going to be cheaper in the short term. And it's important that we do our part, and as Cindy said, helping to keep forests as forests by using certified products and not simply the cheapest thing available. Having said that, I also want to note that while there is an ongoing effort to make certification feasible for small forest owners, it can be economically challenging for many small private forest owners. They're very responsible managers. They love their land and their forests. They take great care of them, and they're in addition, they're strictly regulated by the state. But you know, certification is a process that requires resources, and sometimes it's a difficult stretch for some small forest owners. What I can assure you is that if your wood was produced in the U.S. or Canada, and most of what's available here was produced in the U.S. or Canada, as you'll see in a future slide here, it does have a high probability of being sustainably sourced. And in addition to forest certification, just so we're clear, there is also a complementary effort to and process to certify chain of custody. Both PEFC and FSC have a chain of custody certification. This is one of my favorite maps. It's from a collection of interesting graphics prepared by David Merrill and Lauren Leatherby and published in Bloomberg. You can see the reference down there. You should go take a look at it. They've got a lot of really interesting maps. But in this one, they consolidate land in America by usage so that we get a visual depiction of how much of our land is utilized for different needs. Here you can see the area of U.S. forest lands that are protected. About a third of the U.S. is forested, and this is the portion that's protected. And then here we have managed forests, both federal, state, corporate, and private timberlands. Okay, and here you can see the portion that's a fairly small portion that is harvested each year. And in fact, according to this graphic, wildfires take out more of our timber every year than clear cutting does. This is, these next three charts are from a selection of, it's just a great website produced by Mila Alvarez at the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities. You can go take a look at it at usaforest.org. Just an immense collection of wonderful information about forests in America. But you can see here the distribution of U.S. timberlands by geography, and the orange, red, and brown are public lands. The green and light green, dark green are private. And you can see that the private timberlands are heavily concentrated in the south and the north. This is, shows that from the same website, shows that although timberland area, the graph on the right, the area forested has remained fairly stable for over 70 years. The growing stock has increased tremendously, particularly in the south, the yellow line, and the north, the green line, showing that, or indicative of the high proportion of active private ownership and management. And then this shows the volume of roundwood or logs that were harvested and cut in the United States in 2016. As you can see, again, the preponderance is in the south and the north, where 78% of our wood is supplied. That U.S. endowment site that I showed has even greater detail about where industry is located, but as you can see here, and not surprisingly, because wood is heavy and costly to move, that most of the industry is located where the trees are, and fortunately where most of the population is. So you don't have to move the wood quite as far. This is a taxonomy that I created just to give you an overview of how wood is processed and the products that result from the trees that we cut. Basically, you can do three things with wood, and then you make it into a variety of different products. So I'll go through these over the next 6 slides here in more detail. First of all, when you take a log from the forest and take it into manufacture it, you can either saw it, which I think everyone understands, into basically converting a round log into a rectangular solid piece of wood that we call lumber, or you can peel with a rotary peeling or slice it into veneer, or you can chip it, flake it, grind it for other products. In all of those processes, there is a waste stream, and we've gotten very good at capturing that waste stream and utilizing it as well. So let's take a closer look at sawing. Lumber is typically defined as either softwood or hardwood, softwood being conifers and hardwood being deciduous. Typically, hardwoods are harder than softwoods, but not always. Douglas fir is a very hard softwood. Aspen is a softer hardwood. We call lumber green if it hasn't been dried with the moisture content reduced or dried in a kiln. It can be rough sawn or we surface it. You might find lumber that's machine stress rated if it's going into a particularly critical load-bearing application. So we have lumber, which I think most of you are familiar with. Glue laminated timber is gluing that lumber together in the same direction to create a larger component that can bear a heavier load. A newer product, it was developed in Europe, is cross-laminated timber. It's becoming quite popular in the US now, which is similar to glue lam. It's laminating timber or lumber together to create larger components with each ply running in perpendicular direction. These can be huge components that are a complete wall or floor unit. Oops, sorry. Then we have finger jointed. It's just a way of making a longer piece of wood out of shorter pieces of lumber. It helps us utilize the wood more effectively. And then you have pressure treated lumber, which is treating the wood so that it can withstand moisture, termites, and other insects. If we go take a look now at peeling and slicing into veneer, this shows veneer coming off of a peeler. We can take that veneer and lay it up into plywood where you have like cross-laminated timber. It's in each ply is a perpendicular direction, or you can put them all in the same direction and create a thicker piece of wood called laminated veneer lumber, or LVL. And chipping, flaking, grinding wood can create many different kinds of products. The most common one is pulp and paper, but also oriented strand board was this is oriented strand board here. It's a plywood substitute that was developed as the volume of logs available for peeling reduced, and now there's 2/3 of the structural panel market in the US is OSB. There's also particle board, medium density fiber board, pellets, and a whole variety of products. This just shows how we take different components and make composites with. You can take lumber and finger jointed lumber for the flange, and I-beams or plywood and oriented strand board for the web, and create an I-beam that replaces a solid sawn piece of wood. And then finally we have a lot of this material goes into energy. The forest products industry is the largest producer and user of energy and biomass of any industrial sector in the US. And the important thing here is that replaces the need, that energy to fuel the kilns and the boilers, replaces the need to use fossil fuels, and significantly reduction in greenhouse gases. This chart is from the Dovetail Partners. It shows how we've gotten so much better at how we use our wood. We've gone from 35 to 40% process yields on lumber to over 52% now, and we've developed a whole host of of new applications for processed material that previously wasn't used, and have gone from almost 40-45% being thrown into landfill or incinerated without energy recovery to none. So we've done a great job of using the residuals from our forests. Lumber production in the United States, just give you a few quick facts here. 54% of U.S. softwood lumber is produced in the South. 90% of U.S. softwood lumber imports are from Canada. And so like I said earlier, almost all the lumber you get in America comes from either U.S. or Canada. And 7.4% comes from Europe, Chile, and New Zealand, which are also countries with good forestry practices. So that's why you can have a high degree of confidence in the wood you buy in America. This shows about the structural panel usage. 82% of U.S. OSB and 62% of the plywood is produced in the South. 99% of what we get of the OSB that we import comes from Canada, and that's 74% of Canada's total production comes to the U.S. And then in softwood plywood, we start to get a little more diversity in supply. I could say here that Chile and Canada, or you can be confident about, I would be a little more careful about making sure of your sources for other suppliers. And this just shows a bit about U.S. softwood lumber consumption by end use. 33% into residential construction, 39% into repair and remodel. So you can see why housing has such a big impact on the forest products industry in the United States. When housing starts are down, the industry suffers, and likewise when housing is booming, the industry is doing well. And relative to the final point that Cindy made, which I liked about this old house, you know, and this whole idea of carbon being stored in the products that we build, half-life by product end use, 100 years in a single-family home, 70 years in multifamily apartment buildings, and 30 years in residential repair and remodel. So it really is a carbon sink that's valuable. And final slide here just shows to emphasize what I was saying about housing starts and how important they are. You can see prior to the Great Recession, 2008 through 2010, housing peaked up there at the black line. An incredible amount of construction activity that we have yet to recover to that point. We're still not back to what we were in 2006. But it has improved. Housing will always have a big impact on the U.S. forest industry. And I think that's, I've got a few little bullet points here. The South accounts for all U.S. housing. 10 years after, we're not back, and Canadian owned capacity has recently migrated to the U.S. South to help supply this. So that's all, and thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kent. So thank you all for joining us for this first session of the Wood Carbon Seminar. So the intention of these first 2 weeks is really to understand the lay of the land. I can see some really interesting questions that are mirroring some of mine that have come through the chat. So we're looking forward to coming back with Kent and Cynthia next week at the same time for a moderated discussion. So the next steps that we have going forward, the course page link was posted earlier on in this chat function. We will be posting the webinar recordings as well as the slides. We recognize that we're going quickly as we're trying to get through some core material, but the goal is that we'll have time to talk through that again next week and reinforce or understand better what some of those issues were. So again, There's a link to a form to evaluate what areas you want to learn more about in that discussion as well. So that's just a click the box kind of thing. And then at the end, there's a place to provide questions, specific written comments that you'd like us to try and address. We'll do our best to do that and make an interesting and dynamic discussion next week. So we would like you to get the surveys done by 9 o'clock on Monday so we have time to synthesize that and prepare. So we're going to finish right now, and that can give you some time to do that work now if you have the time. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the sponsors of the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, and specifically the American Wood Council and Google for sponsoring this wood carbon seminar. Thank you so much. Have a great day.